Hey, this is Edwin Dearborn and another edition of Growth Driven here. And I've got Chris Widener here, and we're going to talk about leadership and success. Hey, this is Edwin Dearborn, another edition of Growth Driven. And I love to bring to you leaders that teach you how to really lead. And I found Chris Widener here on my LinkedIn connections, looked at his website, looked at his energy, and I was like, I've got to have this guy on my show. So Chris, thank you so much for joining us here on Growth Driven.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So, I looked at your website and speaking in front of these huge audiences, you've got so much acclaim, which I'll let you kind of let the listeners know about. But Public Speaker Hall of Fame. You've been on stage with past presidents, famous athletes, business leaders that everybody knows about. So you've obviously got your chops, as a public speaker. How did that public speaking career begin for you?
Well, it started right out of college. And it started out of college because I had a crazy upbringing. And my upbringing, my dad died when I was 4. And so my mom had to sell this house. Our house that we were living in, my dad paid $55,000 for in 1968. It recently sold for over $3 million. Well, my dad didn't have a lot of insurance. He was making a lot of money. I think the last year he was alive, 1969, he made $90,000, but he only had $30,000 worth of life insurance. So my mom had to start flipping houses. So she sold that house because she couldn't afford the $400 a month for the payment, So she started flipping houses. We started moving around, 28 homes, 11 different schools, shipped off to live with relatives twice. I was a real handful. So my mom shipped me off to live with my Aunt Rochelle and my Uncle Paul once. He was a log truck driver. She was a school bus driver. Her nickname was Sarge, by the way, and she definitely was Sarge. And then I got shipped off to live with my sister and her Seattle police officer husband in the 9th grade. And I started drugs in the 5th grade and finally overcame all that, got out of it, got into college, graduated with a degree in youth and family work. I was going to go help other at-risk kids. And I started getting asked to speak. Like, how did you pull yourself out of this whole mess and that upbringing and all that? So it started in 1988, right out of college, talking to high school, summer camps, youth groups, colleges, whatever. And then it slowly, as I got older, it evolved more into, working more with adults, doing time management, things like that. Eventually it evolved into leadership and influence, and got a couple of really big breaks in the early 2000s. I got to work with 3 of the great legends in our industry, a guy named John Maxwell, a guy named Jim Rohn, and a guy named Zig Ziglar. And that really is what set my career really, really at a higher trajectory, was getting to work with those 3 guys.
Yeah, obviously, what a great gift. And thanks for telling your story. I mean, the fact that you overcame your drug use, the father dying, being shipped around to different people. Those are all common reasons why people don't succeed. But it's also, I found, in great leaders, it's kind of that level of challenge and disappointment and grief along the way also becomes a great springboard for being motivated to find the other side.
Yeah. Well, especially if you learn from it, you grow from it. There's all these little pithy sayings and they're cliche, but I always say one of the reasons things become cliche is because they're generally true. So people say them, right? Sink or swim, you become bitter or you become better, and all of those things, we have a choice in everything that happens to us. You can either sink or swim. You can either become bitter or better, and you can either let it drag you down, or you can use it as a stepping stone to something else. Les Brown, the great speaker, he always used to say a setback is just a setup for a comeback. And I've always loved that, it's always our choice how we're going to respond to everything that happens to us.
Amen. I completely agree with that. I think, and you see that as a common thread with people that achieved greatness. If you study history, Abraham Lincoln, or these great people, the adversity they had to overcome before they had their greatness. So
I think it's the adversity that makes the greatness.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
it's an overused analogy, but again, because it's good. When a bodybuilder wants to make a bigger muscle, they have to exercise it to the point where it actually tears the muscle fibers. The muscle fibers tear underneath. So if you're doing a curl and it's enough weight, it's actually tearing that muscle. And then when it rebuilds, it builds back a little bit bigger, and you do it again and it builds back a little bit bigger. And it's a good analogy, because when we use that muscle, whether it's willpower or overcoming adversity, persistence, tenacity, whatever it might be, it makes it stronger. When we show courage, it makes us more courageous.
Yeah. Very, very well said. As you've been saying these things, if I look down, it's because I'm taking notes.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
I'm a big note taker. I've always had a notepad with me, I love writing things down. So, Chris, so now you got the public speak. Typically, when you were out there on the stage, and then we'll get to the COVID part and how that changed it, but when you've been speaking for these 20 years, what were some of the common individuals and the aha moments that they walked away with? Like, what did you feel that, obviously you talk about impact, but what did you get from the audience that they really understood from you, something that shape-shifted their lives?
The number one thing that I've taught for the last 20 something years, at least, is that character is more important than skills. And the way I demonstrate this is I have the audience break up into groups of 2 or 3, and I say, I want you to think about a great leader that you've had in your life. It might have been your parents, might have been a teacher, might have been a baseball coach, might have been a college professor, might have been a boss. I don't care who it was. Or it might just be some famous person that you've respected, a president or a business leader or something like that. Think about that person, and then I want you to write down 10 words that describe that person. And I've done this 1,000 times with 1,000 audiences as small as I did it last week in Tulsa, Oklahoma with 15 people. And I've done it I think the biggest one I ever did was in Garland, Texas with 7,000 people. My bigger events, I don't do it. It's too much pandemonium in the room. But and so here's what happens. They start writing down words, friendly, gregarious, good communicator, integrity, whatever. They write down these words. And then I ask them to go back through, and I say, here's what I want you to do. I want you to write down whether that word is a skill or a character trait. So write an S or a C next to it. And so a skill would be, I'm a good communicator. He was a good communicator. That's a skill. But honesty, integrity, friendly, kind, those are character traits. And I've done this 1,000 times. And at the end of that, I say, now add them up. And the reason I have you do 10 is so it's easy to do a percentage. How many of you had more character traits than skills? And I've asked it of 1,000 audiences. Never once have more people answered skills than character. So then I flip it on the audience and I say, okay, you've just seen 1,000 people all come to the same conclusion that character to you was more important than skill. So if that's true, then maybe what people who are following you are looking for in you is character rather than skill. Now, you need to have both. You need to have character and skill, but skill will let you lead for a short while. Character will let you lead for a long while. And you can have all the skill in the world, but if you don't have character, eventually your folks are going to figure it out and they're not going to come back. So I would rather have a 7. Let's talk about car salesman. I'd rather have a 7 on the skill level who's a 10 on the character level than a guy who's a 10 on the skill level and a 2 on the character level, because he's going to cause you all sorts of problems on the lot, because people are going to say, he lied to me. I'm never coming back here again. Whereas the other person, they're going to say, this guy told me the truth, and I'm going to tell my mom and my brother and my coworkers and everybody. So character actually is the thing that creates more success even than skills. And that's been, for the last 20 years or so, one of my primary messages, if not the primary message.
Great message. Love that message. And I think it's such an important message these days. And I'll tell you my viewpoint of why it's even more important. Because your character will now show up on Yelp reviews and Facebook reviews, and mentions on social media. You can't hide character. I mean, look at some of the famous stars that have character flaws, personal flaws, and eventually somebody catches them on video doing something that they shouldn't be doing. And now their career, regardless of their acting skills or business skills, their career is gone.
Yeah. And I always use sometimes in my speeches, I always say, I'm an equal opportunity political basher. And so I'll choose one Republican and one Democrat, both of whom were brilliant men, highly skilled people, completely undone and unable to do the good that they could have done because of their lack of character. And the Republican is sort of the low hanging fruit. It's Richard Nixon, right? I mean,
Yeah.
most people do not know what a highly skilled and brilliant man the guy was, because all we remember is him going, "I am not a crook," or whatever.
Totally. Yeah.
But most people don't know that even though he was sort of verboten, the next few presidents would sneak him back into the White House to get advice from him because he was truly that brilliant. But he had that character flaw that took him out of the highest office in the land. And then I would say the second one is Bill Clinton, perhaps second, maybe only to Thomas Jefferson in terms of how smart a president is. I mean, Rhodes Scholar, Fulbright Scholar, I can't remember which, good looking guy, gregarious, governor, but undone by a character flaw. Right.
Yep.
He was not able to do what he could have done as this really highly skilled guy because he was constantly fighting that flank that his character flaw brought into his life. And so you don't have to be the president to experience that. You can be a car dealer, or you can be an insurance salesman, or you could be whatever you are. Right. We have to make sure that those character flaws don't undo the good that we could do because of our high skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. Good points. Like I said, I've been taking notes. You definitely have some things here that are very tweetable, but also very memorable and very important. So COVID hits about 18 months ago, 16 months ago, whenever it was. It's been a blur. How did it? Obviously, it had an impact on public speaking for you. How did you navigate those waters in that time?
Well, this is the nice thing. I have never been a single income source kind of person. I realized early on that you need to have other sources of income. So I live off of royalties, wipe out my whole speaking business. And I still have royalties that come in, coaching, some of those kinds of things as well. But I know some speakers that were making $300,000 a year 2 years ago, and now they're driving Uber, because they don't have a book, they don't have an audio program, they don't have a coaching program, they don't have a course they can sell. And so a lot of people really got caught because they were living it up and getting paid really good money.
Yep.
It's not bad if somebody can show up and give a speech for $10,000 for an hour, and there were a lot of people doing that, and then it was wiped out and they had no other income. So that's what I did, was I continued to rely on and be thankful for and grateful for my royalty income. But then I started doing some coaching and some of those things as well, and put together some programs. And of course, then immediately people shifted to virtual speeches. So I did a lot of virtual speeches over the last year and a half.
Great. Hey, if you're just joining in now on Growth Driven, or you're listening later on podcasts, I'm Chris Widener, and his last name is spelled WIDENER.com. So chriswidener.com, and they can go to your website, find out about your books. I went there myself. You have a number of books, your coaching program, and just generally, if they're looking to, things will open up. And Chris, to me, I think there's going to be a renaissance, a big renaissance of public speaking, because I think people have gotten cabin fever and they're tired of looking at screens.
Yeah.
I live here in Vegas, and Vegas is just packed with people.
Yeah, we were out there about 3-4 weeks ago. Yeah, for my birthday.
Yeah, so it's busy here, and the convention. You can start to see the conventions being scheduled again, and I think there's going to be a lot of pent up angst of let's get out of the house, let's go to Vegas, and let's network again, right?
Yeah.
So I think you had multiple sources of income. Great to hear. Tell us about the future, where you're going and what you see, maybe the coaching business, or where you are kind of looking at in the future to make your impact.
Yeah. Well, I'm 55 now, so that's kind of funny. I get half price movie tickets. So that's kind of cool. But so I'm starting to look at, okay, the next 10 years. In 10 years, I'll be 65. So my wife and I, been sitting down and talking about what that looks like. I am enjoying coaching a lot more than I used to be on the road all the time. And I would do up to 70 events a year. And 70 events is basically 140 to 150 days a year. That I used to do, and frankly, I don't like it. And this is not the glamorous 1950s anymore on the airplanes where everybody got on in suits and they brought you a giant plate with actual china and you got to eat. Now it's like wear your mask and they're throwing peanuts from the front and hope you catch them and whatever. It's terrible to fly. I still love speaking, but it's the getting there that's the worst. Yeah. So building out the coaching program, and I work with a lot of executives and successful people who just want to become more successful. But also I help people, they write their books and people who want to become speakers and things like that. And I'm enjoying that more. And one of the nice things I like about it is I can do it on a Zoom or something like that. I don't have to travel. I can do it over the phone or the Zoom. But I'll still probably continue to do 20 to 30 speeches a year. My wife and I are growing a real estate business. I'll probably write a book every year and a half. I just had a new book come out called Lasting Impact, How to Create a Life and Business That Live Beyond You. I release new audio programs from time to time and video courses and things like that. So I'm a multi-pronged person, a little bit ADD, but I actually have a friend who wrote a book called The Gift of ADHD. If you don't have it, you should get it. And he went through and he found all of these people, famous, successful people who had ADHD. And he's like, it didn't hold them back. So don't let it hold you back. And that's probably me.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. I think it's almost become popular that I have this label, so therefore I can't succeed. Yeah. When in actual fact, that label just may be the springboard.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I heard somebody say the other day that people who label themselves, they will use it as an offense and a defense. And I started thinking about that. That's really interesting. Well, you should listen to me because of this. Well, don't talk to me this way because of this.
Right.
All the things. A weapon and a defense, a weapon and a shield.
Yeah, that's a great observation. I've never thought of it that way, but I agree with you. I think that I think unfortunately psychology goes, well, this is a disability, and some people, they see the glass half full and they're like, no, that's my superpower.
Yeah.
And there's so many times where I've heard stories about actors who had ADD. I couldn't read a script. I couldn't remember. And they go on to become some of the greatest actors in the world.
Well, think about, I'll talk about a guy. Do you know Peter Dinklage? You know that name?
No, I don't.
He's an actor and he has dwarfism. And he was one of the biggest stars of Game of Thrones.
Oh yeah, no, okay.
So Peter was actually, he had just graduated high school when I moved. I got my first job as a youth director, and I coached local high school basketball in northern New Jersey right out of college in 1988. And Peter had just graduated from school there, and so I never met him, but he was sort of getting to be well known, and it was from that town, and so everybody talked about him. And he came out and he just said, "I'm not going to be a dwarf and everything. I'm not going to take dwarf roles." I think the only one he ever took was he was the elf in Elf, or he was the children's book writer in Elf. And I think that's the only time he actually ever played, where his size was part of the story. He just said, "I'm not going to be that actor. I happen to be short, but I'm an actor." And he has become a really brilliant actor. He just sort of ignores what some people would consider, a negative. And he's just like, it's not a negative. I just am shorter than everybody else, but I'm a great actor. And he's become known. And I mean, who knows how much money he made off of Game of Thrones.
And is still making money off of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I mean, the guy never has to work another day in his life, right?
Never. But I'm sure he will because
he loves it.
Because he loves what he does, and and you went back to your point about character. He's got character. And I think people that have great character, they have a great work ethic.
Yeah.
They actually enjoy participating, engaging, contributing. It's like, yeah, I'm wealthy, but if I'm not playing the game of life in whatever capacity I found my purpose in, it's almost like you're not alive.
Yeah. I know this in this real estate business we're involved in. There's a guy, he's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and he has like 12,000 agents that he are on his team and everything. And on that website, you can literally go and there's a button that you can press and schedule a phone call with him. And it's like at that point, most people would have checked out and give no access to anybody. But any one of his 12,000 agents can literally click on that button and go schedule a call with him at any given time. It's like it's a virtual open door policy and access. And I've always been amazed by that.
Yeah, I think that right there is such a great attribute of a leader, is that access. I think you reminded me of a story. I read all the time about marketing and branding and positioning and how to gain the edge. And there was this hotel that was in Europe. They maybe had only 8 or 10, but it was a 5-star, very well-known chain in Europe. And the founder, the CEO at the time, had a red phone in the waiting room. And that phone went directly so if you had a problem that no one in the hotel was solving,
wow,
you could pick up the red phone and talk to the CEO and go, my biscuits were cold when they were brought to the room. And he'd call the hotel and go, get the guy the biscuits, whatever and it got to the point where, well, number one, everybody in the hotel knew that if they didn't perform,
somebody's picking up that red phone.
So that just kind of brought their game up to a whole new level.
Yeah.
But what it said is that I can discuss what I want, and they actually care about me. And I think that's that character point that you bring up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now, okay, so you got me kind of interested, because I've been doing starting to get into some real estate. What kind of real estate are you doing, and where do you plan on taking that venture?
So my wife is a real estate agent, and she just went with a company called EXP. And EXP Realty is a completely, totally virtual company. It's based out of Washington State, up in I think in Bellingham, Washington is where it's based, but they don't even really have corporate offices or anything. And it's a combination of selling real estate, which obviously my wife does, but then also building a team of realtors. It's the fastest growing real estate company in America right now. It's about adding about 1,000 agents a week, about 4,000 or 5,000 a month. They're in 15 countries, so we're building a worldwide team of agents, and then they're opening 3 or 4 more every quarter. They're publicly traded on the NASDAQ, and really the beauty for agents is they're not just selling a house, getting the money and moving on. There's stock grants, so they get actual stock grants from the company. So it's really a good wealth builder for people in real estate. It's a very exciting venture, because it really puts the power back into the agent's hands and the wealth building into the agent's hands, rather than just the brokerage, who typically makes most of the money.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so you're obviously involved in helping your wife together.
We do training. I do the training and stuff like that. And I built a website. It's wideneracademy.com, and I do free trainings there. Like one that's up right now is called Art of Influence for Real Estate Agents. And it's basically a free 20-minute talk that basically says, how do you gain trust, respect, admiration, and loyalty from clients and prospects, because you want people to respect you and admire you, and you want them to trust you. If they're gonna use you for the biggest financial decision of their life, for most people that is the biggest financial decision, is what kind of where they're going to sink $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $700,000. You want somebody that's trustworthy. So I do that, and then there's ways for people to contact us there and such. But I do more of the training and the motivating and the recruiting, and she does more of the real estate side.
Yeah, good. That's a great combination. I love that combination. You guys must have a lot of fun with that. If you're just joining in with Chris Widener, you can reach out to him on chriswidener.com, which I just mentioned there on the web or on the broadcast here, you also can go to, what is it, Widener Academy?
Widener Academy. Yeah, if you're a real estate agent or you know a real estate agent and you want to just give them some good info, it's free. I don't even require an email. They can just show up, land, and hit play, and they can watch it. It's totally free, and I won't even know you were there unless you want to let me know that that you were there. And by the way, my email is simple: chris@chriswidener.com if you want to reach out.
Good. And also that you're also active on LinkedIn, which is where we connected. So if you're active on LinkedIn, you can also connect with Chris there. Multiple places to find you. Great. Well, you're doing real estate. You've got, I think personally, that's a big play. Real estate to me is ultimately where I want to take the money I make and kind of have that residual income. Because I'm 57 and I'm in the same boat. Like 10 years from now, where am I going to be?
Yeah.
And I don't want to have to be hustling and getting on a plane doing 70 gigs a year.
It's all about residual. Everything's about residual. And that's one of the nice things about EXP is when you tell other people about the company and they decide to become a realtor for EXP, you get a little piece of the action every time they sell a house. And so it's got a little bit of an affiliate kind of thing there built in as well. And that's where it creates the residual income. Especially if you build a big team and you've got 1,000 agents selling stuff, and every month you make a little tiny piece off of every $500,000 house they're selling. So that's our plan. 7 to 10 years, we're going to do that. And then we're going to ride off into the sunset and travel around. It's going to be fun.
There you go. Where are you going to travel to?
I've been all over the world in my speaking engagements, but the problem is I never really stayed that long. I actually went from Seattle to Singapore to Seattle again in 70 hours. And I spent the next 4 days in bed because that was not a smart decision to make. But I mean, I've been to Australia and all over Europe and all over the United States. There's only four states in the United States I've never been to 46 of them. But neither one of us have traveled much in Asia. I've been to China and Singapore, but I would love to go to Vietnam and Cambodia and Thailand and some of those places. And I've heard they're just gorgeous and beautiful. But we'd also like to spend some time in Europe, South America. I've never been to, it's actually the continent I've never been to, South America. I'd love to go down to Brazil and, some of those places, Chile, and just experience different cultures. I love different cultures. I love learning and meeting people. And that's the one thing I love about travel. I'll tell you a funny story. You'll like this. Yeah. So my stepdaughters, my wife and I will talk to anybody because we find people interesting. And my stepdaughters are always like, why do you talk to everybody? Why do you talk to everybody? So we were in Mykonos, Greece. We got married 2 years ago in Italy, just outside Florence. And prior to that, the four of us took a week-long cruise through Greece and Croatia, Montenegro. And so we walk into this little tiny bar. There's 4 tables in this bar in Mykonos. And we sit down and there's this older couple. They looked like they were 70, 75 and very elegantly dressed. You could tell they were affluent. So we start talking to them. And the woman says to me, she says, what do you do? They're British. What do you do for a living? And I said, well, I'm a writer. And she pats her husband on the knee and she says the understatement of the day. She says, oh, my husband's a writer as well. And I said, oh, really? So like, what kinds of things do you write? And he said, well, I'm a playwright mainly. And I said, well, have you written any plays that I might have heard of? And he said, Mary Poppins. And I went, oh, okay. Now we got my attention. So we're sitting there and his wife says, he's much too humble to tell you this, but have you ever heard of an EGOT? And I said, sure, Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony. It's a very prestigious thing. Very few people have done it. She says, well, my husband, the only one he doesn't have is the T. Which I thought was kind of funny, given the fact that that the T is, he calls himself a playwright, but the Tony is the only one he hasn't gotten. He had multiple Emmys, Grammys, and an Oscar. So she says all he doesn't have is the T. So I look at him, and I don't even think he's spoken other than saying Mary Poppins at this point. And I look at him, and I say, so all you're left with is the ego. And he thought that was the funniest thing. He thought that was so funny. So I said, so what are you working on now? This was June of 2018. And he said, or 2019, at June of 2019. And he says, I'm working on a movie that comes out in September that's based on a television show that I created. And I said, oh, what's the television show you created? And he said, it's called Downton Abbey. And so we had been sitting there in this bar talking to Julian Fellows and his wife, and just had 30 minutes of just a great conversation. They have a second home on Mykonos and all that. As we walked out, Denise turns to Kate, our youngest, and she says, "That's why you talk to everybody." Because you just never know who you're going to sit down next to and what you can learn from them.
You never know. And what an amazing story and what an amazing find. I think that there's a natural, like the heavens reward you with opportunity when you reach out and are gregarious.
Yep.
I think, a lot of people go, "Oh, well, you got lucky." No, I got luck. I created my luck.
Yeah.
Through my humanity, through my generosity, through my reaching out and being interested in people. And I think life rewards you for that. And those special moments, I think, come about, which I think is something that everybody could have a takeaway here. If you're looking to create these special opportunities and these special connections, be interested in people, start talking to people. You never know who's standing next to you.
Well, there's a great story. In fact, if you Google, he's a friend of mine, Bill Stainton, Stainton, Bill Stainton TED Talk. Look that up.
Okay.
And Bill is a member of Mensa. He's won 29 Emmy Awards for comedy writing. He's a brilliant guy. Wow. And he is really, 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 really into classical music. And in this story, he sits down on an airplane after giving a speech, and it's a 4-hour flight. And this little old lady, like 100 years old, sits next to him, and she starts talking, and he's like, "I do not want to talk to this lady." So he puts his headphones on, and he can see that she's still talking to him. He's like, "Huh? What? Yeah, sure. He's trying to get her to realize he does not want to talk to her. So they go through the entire 4-hour flight. He listens to classical music the entire 4-hour flight. And then finally they go, "Okay, time to put your headphones away, turn off your phones, blah, blah, blah." Final approach. So he takes everything off, and now he's got 30 minutes on the final approach. And the woman says, "What were you listening to?" And he says, "I was listening to classical music." She says, and she was Russian. I think she was Russian, or I can't remember exactly. But anyway, she had an accent. And she says, "Oh, I love classical music. Who were you listening to?" And he said, "I was listening to my favorite classical composer, Stravinsky." And she says, "I love Stravinsky." And he says, "Yeah, I was just listening to," and he named something sweet, right? Mm-hmm. She says, "Yes, I love Stravinsky. He was such a good friend of mine. I was with him the day he wrote that." And he just went like this. And the point of the story is, you never know who's sitting next to you.
You never know.
That was one of my greatest mistakes of my life. I could have had 4 hours with a woman who was a childhood friend of Stravinsky. Wow. And I love that story. And he's such a funny guy. The way he tells the story, it's a fun watch, short little clip that you can find on YouTube or whatever. But Bill Stainton, TED Talk.
I'll definitely check it out. Hey, Chris, before we go, one last word. Do you have any last words that you'd like to impart here on the show?
I always have the same last words. People ask me, "Well, what's the best piece of advice you ever got?" And it was a kind of a crazy story. I was at a conference. I was a young man. I was at a conference. Don't remember what the conference was. Standing out there, hundreds of people in the lobby. This is a weird story, but it had a profound impact on me. And we're all standing out in the lobby. I was by myself at this conference. And at one point, I guess kind of turned around, and there was like a 50-year-old woman and a 30-year-old woman standing together. Found out later they were mother-daughter. They were also at this conference. And the daughter's eyes, she saw me, and her eyes went like saucers, and she didn't say anything. And her mom looked at her and looked at me, looked at her, looked at me, and said, "Is that him?" And she said, she didn't even say anything. She just she nodded her head. And then and I'm weirded out at this point.
Yeah, totally.
The mom says, "Well, tell him." And she was just like, and I'm like, "What's going on here?" And she said, "Well, in the middle of the night, my daughter woke me up at like 2 a.m. and said she just had the most crystal clear dream that she'd ever had in her life. It woke her up." And I said, "Okay, what's that?" She said she saw a man's face and was told to give him a message. And that's why she's bugged out, because apparently it was my face that she saw in this dream. And I got to tell you, I didn't get their names. I didn't follow up with them. I've never spoken to them ever again. Wow. But So she looks at her daughter and says, tell him. And she said, I'm supposed to tell you, be a voice, not an echo.
Mm.
And that was in 1989 or 1990. So it's been 31, 32 years. And I still to this day remember that. Be a voice, not an echo. And I've tried to look it up. If it was a quote, it gets attributed to Einstein, but I don't know who. I don't know. And a lot of stuff gets attributed to Einstein and Abraham Lincoln. But I don't care who said it. It was the fact that somebody said it to me, and I always said I don't want to just echo somebody else's stuff. I want to be a voice. I might read other people's stuff, but then how do I take that and make it my own? How do I run it through my own grid and come out with a bigger or better or more profound truth to it? And so that's always been my mission. I want to be a voice and not an echo.
Love that. Chris, thank you so much for being here. I loved this interview. I've got like a whole page of notes of things that we've talked about that that I'm going to process into my
good.
You know?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
And so to my audience here, thank you so much for joining us. And maybe you find this video a year from now. Thank you for joining us then in the future. So this has been another edition of Growth Driven with Chris Widener. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again soon.